Alright, so let's continue to the gender inequality or gender egalitarian or gender equality issues. So as I mentioned earlier, and there are the many types of the stratification or inequality by gender. So the gender is divided into people as the males or females or man or woman, but based on the very simple category on their work. There have been, and sometimes there had been many differences in terms of their participation. And as you could see in this lecture slide, even some of the basic rights covered in the civil rights, these were not covered at all. So not having the living will or having the right of the property ownership and the participation of the legal procedure, such as the election processes and others. The legal abortion is still debating in some of the states because of the new political orientations and political movements, but still there are ongoing debates about the equality of the woman and by gender. So even though again based on even though having the high levels of the employment and the labor force participation, and even having the higher education, having the very high level of education, still a woman with the same level of education, same level of job and the experiences, with controlling all other conditions same, having the gender difference would be equivalent of the differences of the 20%. Because even when a woman's employment status is equal to men's on the employment, women are generally make only 81%, 81 cents per every dollar made by her male counterpart. So it's not about because the women are doing less and they're working shorter time, having all the conditions same, controlling all others same. The women are likely to have the 81% of the income of the males in the same levels of the education or the same levels of counterpart as males. So the gender pay gap. So I will also add this link to the blackboard, but showing that where there are the pay gaps because of the high levels of the discrimination, gender segregation, and high emphasis of the male and the female division of the domestic work, for example. So these are the sexism showing that the woman should do something, such as nursing and the caring capabilities for their family members, and the males do the breadwinner working. And then feminism is arguing that woman and man are created equal and they should have the equal opportunities based on the qualifications, for example. So in many parts, these are based on the meritocracy. It means that they should be treated as on their capabilities and their qualifications and the licenses they have. So these are some of the notions. But still, the reality is not that idea. So all workers of the age 16% more than 16. The wage gap is still a lot. The wage of worker ages in there are still the wage gap. So even though these are getting the lower and lower, the gap is getting narrower and narrower by time and time. But these trends are not that fast, but it's narrower among the young workers. This is the positive message, but still on the longer time before, there were 60% of the male's income, and they were on the 71.6%, but these changes were not that rapid in these days. So that's okay, that's the problem. So there are many different messages, and these are improving more and more in terms of the equality. But the stall of the gender revolution, in the pay gap is still a very debatable issue in terms of the family scholars and the gender scholars in the sociology. So there are many things why there are still these types of the gap between the gender, based on the gender, based on the male and female. So there are many explanations. So for example, Let's compare. Let's compare one of the very very typical job of the males. The male dominant job is a truck driver, and the woman dominant job is the nurse aide and the nursing profession. Maybe not the high levels of the professional nursing, but nurse aide. So then these are not because we know that there are many of the students, many of the classmates who aim to do the nursing major and the nursing who want to be the nursing professionals. So maybe these are not very compatible. But let's see that there are some differences. So the truck drivers, more than 95%. These are getting lower a little bit in these days, but still very male dominant job. Also, the nurse aide on the full-time, the year-round workers, the medical professionals or the nurse aide, these are very woman-dominant job in the United States historically. So based on the education, let's compare the education. They would have a very similar level of education. For example, the proportion of the truck drivers less than the high school diploma. These are gradually going down and down, and the proportion of the nurse aide below the high school diploma getting lower and lower. So we can see that very similar proportions based on their job categorization. Truck drivers lower than high school, the nurse aide lower than high school, or some levels of the degree higher than high school diploma of the nurse aide and the nurse aide, the professional and health professionals, truck drivers. We can see that the proportion of the education, these are very, very similar because compared with the licensed the registered nurses, the nurse aides, and the truck drivers, they would acquire the less levels of education compared with the graduate degree jobs and the other bachelor degree jobs of BS, other jobs. But even though having very similar levels of the education, still the very male-dominant jobs, and these are highly paid compared with the nursing, psychiatric, the home health aides, and the nursing aid jobs. So this is what we say the gender devaluation, the gender work devaluation, which means the gender. If the jobs are the woman-dominant jobs, and these are very devalued. Even though having the qualifications are very similar, having the similar levels of education, but the payments on their wages are sometimes devalued because of their discrimination and job segregation. So this is very representative example of the gender devaluations of the wages based on their sex segregation. Also, the sex segregation on the occupation market, the division of the working, the then gender composition of the highest paying occupations. So financial managers about half and half, but there are more dominance of the males in many of the engineering jobs, the pilots and engineers and the dentists and the surgeons and the lawyers. There are the more males. And gender composition, the lowest paying jobs, again, the gender devaluations, child care workers and the cashiers, and the accounting jobs and the other service activity jobs. There are the more women. And dishwashers, there are the lower percentage of the females, I don't know why. And even combined with the intersectionality, having more dimension of the races, there are more levels of the decomposition of the deprivation in their wages and their working conditions. So again, the sex segregation, the occupational segregation. I will also add this link to the lecture slide on the Blackboard system. So there are the historical segregation that some jobs are preferred to the males and some preferred by the females. And there are many of the segregation based on the socialization, saying that these jobs are for males and these are for the woman. Or we may, so if you are a male, you feel more familiar and you feel more convenient to be in the male dominant job, because if you feel that you are isolated and you feel segregated, you are less likely to pursue that job or prepare for that career. So there are many of the explanations, but still we'll say that there are very clear segregation in the job compositions. So there are very general increases of the proportion of the people in their STEM field, because many times the STEM field are more or paid better than other jobs. But still, the social scientists, there are the high percentage of the woman. If you see the professors, for example, professors in the humanities and the social sciences, you may see a lot of the woman professors. But in the field of the engineering, computer science, and other types of the very pure science majors, you would see many of the male professors instead of the woman professors. The steady rise for the woman in the STEM, but the gender gap, again, the gender gap remains a lot. It is very consistent. So we can say that there are the less segregation, more and more, even though the improvement is not very fast, but still there are very wide ranges of the gap in terms of their payments. So that will be a very big problem in terms of the gender equality in the United States or other countries. So again, women in the paid labor, they are doing many of the unpaid work. For example, in their the allocation of their housework. So even though there are many countries, we would feel they are more egalitarian the work. The males are doing a very low proportion of the domestic work or the housework. But mostly the women are doing the housework in general, even though they would have the high levels of education compatible with the males. So these are the general phenomena. So care for the household members, Canada and Finland and other countries, you can see that there are the higher proportion of the time of the woman who are doing the most of the care work, housework, and others. And there are more time for the TV watching. Sometimes there are very mixed results by sleeping and the sports. There are some. So there are very uniform pattern of the allocation of the housework. So usually a woman are doing more housework everywhere in most of the countries. So time and money, food preparation and laundry and the cleaning and the grocery shopping, they are doing. So most of the domestic work and the women are doing most of the housework. So other issues, sexuality. Again, the sexuality refers to person capacity, sexual feelings. So we don't have enough time to cover the sexual violences or domestic violences or the sex education. But still, even though the United States are paying very high and very heavy attention to the sex education, but still compared with the counterparts, very highly developed. So economically highly developed and the very leading countries like the United States, but still compared with the very similar and comparable counterparts, there are very high levels of the sexual violations and the teen pregnancy and even the transmission of the sexual disease and the STD, sexually transmitted disease. The United States, for some reason, because of the lower access to the medical procedure or the lower access to the medical insurances, even though the United States is doing very high levels of education and paying more attention to the sexual education in high school or on the education of the sexual, the equal rights, still, there are the higher violences in the domestic violence in the family and the couple. And as we saw recently we saw some alert about the sexual violence in the campus among the acquaintances. So still, there are still so far ways to go, even though the United States is the very strongest country and the most wealthiest and the leading country. But in terms of the health and the sexually transmitted disease or the sexual violences, still the far ways to go compared with the very highly developed countries. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention. Again, sorry again for your inconvenience because of the tech issues and the weather and the announcements. And we will keep our in-person format next week as normal. And I will post the quiz very soon within several hours so that you can prepare for that. All right. Thank you very much and have a great weekend and see you next Monday. Thank you very much.